What if a mother's last wish could change lives? A house full of memories, a faithful dog keeping secrets, and two brothers separated by time and sorrow. In the midst of all this, an unexpected challenge, looking after Buddy, the Labrador that promises to bring a family together. But as the past is unearthed, long-buried truths begin to surface. Can love blossom again where only pain once existed? Discover how a will, a dog and the power of forgiveness transform a forgotten legacy into a future full of hope. You won't want to miss this exciting journey. Translated with DeepL.com, free version. The autumn wind whispered through the maple trees lining Mason Street, scattering golden leaves across Nathan Reed's polished Oxford shoes. He stood motionless before the weathered two-story Victorian house, his childhood home now shrouded in morning mist. The brass key felt heavy in his palm, heavier than it should, weighted with years of absence and unspoken words. "Dad, can we just get this over with?" Lucy's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and impatient. She stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed over her black hoodie, her purple-streaked hair partially hiding her face. At 16, she had mastered the art of making every word sound like an accusation. Nathan checked his watch, force of habit. Even here, hundreds of miles from his Chicago office, time seemed to chase him. "We need to wait for your Uncle Daniel. He has the paperwork from Mom's lawyer." Lucy rolled her eyes and dropped onto the front steps, pulling out her phone. The screen's blue glow highlighted the dark circles under her eyes, remnants of their red-eye flight. Nathan noticed how small she looked against the backdrop of the house, like a misplaced puzzle piece. The crunch of tires on gravel announced Daniel's arrival. Nathan's older brother emerged from his weather-beaten pickup truck, looking exactly as he had at their mother's funeral 3 weeks ago, worn jeans, flannel shirt, and that same expression of barely contained resentment. The 5 years of silence between them stretched like a chasm across the front yard. "You're late," Daniel said, not meeting Nathan's eyes as he climbed the porch steps. "Flight delays," Nathan replied, though they'd actually arrived 30 minutes early. Some habits died hard, like making excuses, like avoiding confrontation. The house's interior hit Nathan like a physical force. Everything was exactly as he remembered, the faded wallpaper with its pattern of climbing roses, the grandfather clock that had marked every minute of his childhood, the worn carpet runner leading upstairs. The air smelled of lemon furniture polish and something else, old books, perhaps, or simply time past. Mom's lawyer said to meet him in the study, Daniel said, already heading down the hallway. His footsteps echoed in the empty house, each one a reminder of all the times Nathan hadn't come home. The study was smaller than Nathan remembered. Bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with their mother's beloved mystery novels and medical reference books from their father's practice. The desk, solid oak, a family heirloom, dominated the room. Behind it, a new addition, a large dog bed, where a chocolate Labrador lay watching them with intelligent brown eyes. "That's Buddy," Daniel said, noticing Nathan's gaze. "Mom got him after her diagnosis. He barely left her side these past 2 years. The unspoken accusation hung in the air, unlike you." Lucy, who had been trailing behind them, suddenly showed interest. "Grandma had a dog." "Your grandmother had many surprising qualities," a new voice said. Howard Chen, their mother's lawyer and an old family friend, stood in the doorway. "Including an interesting sense of humor, which you're about to discover." They settled into various chairs as Howard laid out papers on the desk. Buddy moved to sit between Daniel and Nathan, his tail thumping gently against the floor. Nathan found himself distracted by the dog's steady gaze. There was something unsettling about it, as if the animal could see right through him. "Before we begin," Howard said, adjusting his glasses, "I want you to know that Elizabeth spent considerable time planning this. She was very specific about her wishes." He pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is her last letter to you both, to be read before the will." Daniel took the envelope, his hands slightly shaking. Nathan watched as his brother's eyes moved across the pages, his expression shifting from grief to confusion to something like disbelief. "This can't be serious," Daniel said, passing the letter to Nathan. Nathan began to read, his mother's familiar handwriting bringing a lump to his throat. "My dearest boys, if you're reading this, I'm no longer here to knock your stubborn heads together, which is exactly what you both need. You're probably wondering about the house, its valuable property now that River's Edge has become a tourist destination. But I've watched you both lose your way over the years. Daniel, you've isolated yourself here, letting bitterness take root. Nathan, you've built walls so high that even your beautiful daughter can barely reach you. So here's my final gift to you both, a chance to remember who you are and what family means. The house and all its contents will be held in trust for 1 year. During that time, you must jointly care for Buddy. He needs daily walks, regular vet visits, and most importantly, love and attention. If you can work together and keep him happy and healthy for 1 year, the house becomes yours to do with as you please. Consider it my last attempt at motherly meddling. All my love, Mom." Nathan looked up to find both Daniel and Howard watching him. Lucy had moved to sit on the floor beside Buddy, who had rested his head on her knee, the first time he'd seen his daughter willingly close to anyone in months. "This is ridiculous," Nathan said, his mind already racing through possibilities. "I have a job in Chicago, responsibilities. I can't just, then I'll take care of Buddy myself," Daniel cut in. "I'm already here." "The will is very clear," Howard said firmly. "This has to be a joint effort. Elizabeth believed you both needed this, and frankly, having known you both since you were boys, I agree with her." Nathan looked around the study, at the family photos on the walls, moments frozen in time when they had been whole, before their father's death, before the arguments, before he'd chosen ambition over everything else. His eyes fell on Lucy, who was quietly scratching behind Buddy's ears, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "1 year," he said finally, the words feeling like surrender and possibility all at once. "We'll try it for 1 year." Buddy's tail thumped against the floor, and for a moment, Nathan could have sworn the dog was smiling. Outside, the autumn wind continued to scatter leaves across the lawn, nature's own clock marking the beginning of their strange new chapter. In his pocket, Nathan's phone buzzed with messages from the office, but for the first time in years, he let them go unanswered. Sometimes, he realized, time needed to stop before it could start moving in the right direction again. The first morning in his childhood bedroom, Nathan woke to the sound of paws scratching against his door. He checked his phone, 6:30 a.m. In Chicago, he'd already be reviewing quarterly reports. Here, sunlight was just beginning to filter through the maple branches outside his window, casting dappled shadows on walls that still bore traces of his teenage years, faded posters, old debate team ribbons, remnants of a life he'd left behind. The scratching continued, followed by a low whine. All right, Nathan muttered, pulling on a sweater. He opened the door to find Buddy sitting patiently, leash in mouth. Behind him, Daniel stood in the hallway, already dressed in work clothes. "He needs his morning walk," Daniel said. "Mom always took him around Peterson Lake before breakfast. I have a conference call at 8, of course you do." Daniel's voice carried that familiar edge. "Some things never change, right?" Before Nathan could respond, Lucy emerged from her room, surprising them both. She wore the same clothes as yesterday, her hair a tangled mess. "I'll take him." Daniel and Nathan exchanged glances. "Honey, you don't know the area," Nathan started. "Then come with me." Lucy's challenge hung in the air. "Unless you're too busy." 20 minutes later, they walked along the shore of Peterson Lake, their breaths visible in the crisp morning air. Buddy trotted ahead, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting scents. The lake's surface mirrored the sky, broken only by ripples from early rising ducks. "Mom used to bring us here every Sunday after church," Nathan said, breaking the silence. "She'd pack these elaborate picnics. Until you stopped coming," Daniel finished, appearing suddenly beside them. He'd followed in his truck, parking at the trailhead. Someone had to be here for her Sunday picnics after that. Lucy watched the exchange with sharp eyes. "Why did you stop coming, Dad?" Nathan focused on Buddy, now splashing at the water's edge. "Life got complicated. The firm was expanding, your mother was pregnant with you." "Right. Always an excuse." Daniel kicked a stone into the lake. "Just like when Dad got sick." "Don't." Nathan's voice hardened. "We're not doing this now." "When then?" "Another 5 years." Buddy suddenly barked, drawing their attention. A group of deer had emerged from the woods, and the dog was straining at his leash, tail wagging furiously. "Buddy, stay," Daniel commanded. The lab immediately sat, though his excitement was visible in every quivering muscle. "He's really well trained," Lucy observed, a note of admiration in her voice. "Mom spent a lot of time with him." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "She said he reminded her of us when we were kids, always running ahead, getting into trouble, but coming back when called." Nathan watched as Lucy knelt beside Buddy, scratching his favorite spot behind the ears. For a moment, he glimpsed the little girl she used to be, before the divorce, before he buried himself in work to avoid dealing with the aftermath. The morning passed in uneasy peace as they completed the lake circuit. Back at the house, Nathan found himself in the kitchen, another space frozen in time. The same yellow curtains hung above the sink, the same collection of mismatched mugs filled the cabinet. He selected one, "World's Best Mom," in faded letters, and felt the weight of memory press against his chest. "She kept everything the same," Daniel said from the doorway. "Said she wanted it to feel like home when you finally came back." Nathan set the mug down carefully. "Daniel, save it." Daniel moved to fill Buddy's water bowl. "We both know you're only here because of the will. Once the year's up, you'll sell your share and disappear back to your real life. That's not fair." "Fair?" Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fair would have been you helping when Dad got sick. Fair would have been you visiting Mom more than twice a year. Fair would have been." He was interrupted by a crash from upstairs, followed by Lucy's startled cry. They raced up the stairs to find her in Elizabeth's room, surrounded by fallen boxes and scattered photographs. Buddy was already there, nosing through the mess with concern. "I'm sorry," Lucy said quickly, her voice small. "I was just looking for... I don't know. Something of Grandma's." Nathan began helping her gather the photos. One caught his eye, himself and Daniel as teenagers, arms around each other at a county fair. Their father stood behind them, looking proud and healthy. Before the cancer. Before everything fell apart. "She kept all of them," Daniel said quietly, picking up another photo. "Every school picture, every holiday. Even after you stopped sending new ones." Lucy picked up a more recent photo, Elizabeth with Buddy in this very room, both looking at the camera with identical expressions of contentment. "She looks happy here." "She was," Daniel said. "Despite everything. Buddy helped a lot, especially toward the end." Nathan studied his daughter's face as she traced their mother's image with her finger. He recognized the look, the same one he'd seen in the mirror after his own mother's death, that desperate need to hold on to something, anything, that might keep the memories from fading. "Tell me about her," Lucy asked, looking between her father and uncle. "What was she like when you were kids?" Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, carefully moving aside a pile of Elizabeth's sweaters. "Well, for one thing, she was the worst cook in River's Edge. There was this one Thanksgiving when she tried to." As Daniel's stories filled the room, Nathan watched Buddy settle between Lucy and Daniel, his presence somehow making the space feel less empty. The dog's eyes met Nathan's, and again he had that unsettling feeling of being seen, really seen, by this creature his mother had chosen to be their unlikely guardian. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another message from Chicago, another crisis requiring his immediate attention. But for the first time in years, Nathan let it ring, choosing instead to sit on the floor beside his daughter and listen to stories of the mother he'd kept at arm's length for too long. Outside, a warm breeze stirred the maple leaves, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain and the possibility of change. A week into their stay, River's Edge began showing its true colors. The tourist season was winding down, leaving behind a quieter town where everyone seemed to know Nathan's business before he did. At Riley's General Store, old Mrs. Riley asked about his Chicago job with suspicious accuracy. At the local diner, conversations would halt when he entered, only to resume in whispers once he passed. Small towns, Daniel said when Nathan mentioned it over their awkward dinner. You remember how it is. Or maybe you forgot that too. Lucy pushed her peas around her plate, headphones firmly in place, her armor against family meals. Buddy lay between their chairs, his head swiveling hopefully between potential food droppers. Lucy, Nathan tried, there's a decent high school here. We should look into. The screech of chair legs against hardwood cut him off as Lucy stood. I'm not staying that long. Neither are you. She stomped upstairs, leaving behind the thick silence that had become their nightly companion. Daniel wiped his mouth slowly. She's right, isn't she? You're already planning your escape. Before Nathan could answer, Buddy's head snapped up, ears alert. A moment later, thunder rolled across the sky, and the first heavy drops of rain struck the windows. The dog whined, moving to pace by the back door. He hates storms, Daniel explained, rising. Mom used to. He stopped, pain flickering across his face. Never mind. I'll take him out before it gets worse. I'll do it, Nathan said, surprising himself and Daniel. I could use some air. Outside, the rain fell in sheets, quickly soaking through Nathan's jacket. Buddy led him along a familiar path behind the house, toward the old wooden gazebo their father had built. As they reached shelter, lightning split the sky, illuminating the overgrown garden their mother had once tended with religious devotion. You really hate storms, huh? Nathan watched Buddy press against his legs, trembling slightly. Without thinking, he knelt beside the dog, running his hands through wet fur. Mom must have done this for you. She did. Nathan turned to find Lucy standing in the gazebo entrance, rain dripping from her hoodie. She sat beside them, her shoulder just touching his. I found her journal, she said quietly. In her room. She wrote about Buddy a lot. About you guys too. Thunder crashed again, closer now. Buddy burrowed between them, and Lucy's hand joined Nathan's in comforting him. She wrote about how you were before everything. How you and Uncle Daniel were inseparable. Best friends. Lucy's voice carried an accusation wrapped in curiosity. What happened? Nathan watched the rain cascade off the gazebo roof, forming curtains around them. In this small, storm-wrapped space, the truth he'd buried for so long seemed to surface on its own. Your grandfather, my father, got sick when I was in law school. Brain tumor. It was. He swallowed hard. Daniel dropped everything to come home. He wanted me to do the same, but I was so close to graduating, to making partner track. I thought I could do both, help from a distance, send money. But you couldn't. No. Dad got worse quickly. The medical bills piled up. Daniel gave up his own dreams of medical school to help Mom care for him. And I stayed away. Told myself I was helping more by building my career. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. Lightning flashed again, and in its brief illumination, Nathan saw tears on his daughter's cheeks. Is that why you work so much? To make up for it? The question hit him like a physical blow. Maybe. I don't know. After your mother left, work became safer. Easier than facing what I'd lost. What I was losing. They sat in silence broken only by thunder and rain, until Buddy shifted, placing his head in Nathan's lap with a deep sigh. The simple gesture unleashed something in Nathan's chest, a knot of grief and guilt he'd carried for years. "I found Mom's cookie recipe," Lucy said suddenly. "The one she used to make when you were sick. It was in her journal too. Maybe we could try making them." Nathan looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw past the defensive layers to the little girl who used to beg him to read just one more bedtime story. "I'd like that. Though I should warn you, I once set off the smoke alarm trying to make toast." Lucy's laugh, small but real, mixed with the storm symphony. "Good thing Uncle Daniel's here then. Grandma wrote that he was the only one who could cook." As if summoned by his name, Daniel appeared in the gazebo doorway, holding 3 mugs of something steaming. "Mom's hot chocolate," he explained, passing them around. "She always said storms required chocolate." He settled on Lucy's other side, and Buddy immediately stretched to include him in their circle. The 4 of them sat there, watching the storm, drinking chocolate that tasted of memory in childhood and home. "I found Dad's old chess set today," Daniel said after a while. "Remember how he used to destroy us both? Speak for yourself." "I won once." "He let you win. It was your birthday." "Did not," Nathan stopped, seeing Lucy's intent expression. "What?" "Nothing. Just. Grandma wrote about this too. How you guys would argue about everything and nothing." She smiled slightly. "Guess some things don't change." Another crack of thunder, but Buddy seemed calmer now, surrounded by his unlikely family. Nathan felt something shift in the space between heartbeats, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps its possibility. "Tell me about the birthday game," Lucy asked, and as Daniel launched into the story, embellishing shamelessly, Nathan found himself adding details, correcting exaggerations, falling into a rhythm of remembrance that felt both foreign and familiar. The storm raged on, but in their small shelter, surrounded by darkness and memory and tentative hope, they began the delicate work of rebuilding what time and silence had worn away. Nathan's laptop screen illuminated the kitchen at 3 a.m., casting a ghostly glow across scattered papers and empty coffee cups. Chicago wouldn't wait forever, and the merger documents needed his review. His phone buzzed again, the 4th time in an hour. Buddy's nails clicked against the hardwood as he padded into the kitchen, settling beside Nathan's chair with a disapproving huff. "Don't start," Nathan muttered. "Someone has to keep paying the bills." That's what Mom used to tell herself too. Daniel stood in the doorway, looking exhausted in his hospital scrubs. He'd picked up night shifts at the local clinic, another echo of their parents, their father's medical practice, their mother's late-night nursing rounds. "Rough shift?" Nathan asked, trying to bridge the silence. "Kid with appendicitis. Reminded me of that summer you got sick, remember? Dad operated himself. I remember Mom pacing all night." Nathan closed his laptop, memories drowning out Chicago's demands. "She made Dad promise never to operate on family again. He kept that promise. Unlike some promises." Before Nathan could respond, a scream pierced the pre-dawn quiet. They raced upstairs to find Lucy thrashing in her bed, caught in a nightmare's grip. Buddy was already there, whining softly. "Lucy, wake up. You're safe." Nathan reached for her, but she recoiled. "Don't." Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. "Mom. I want Mom." The words stabbed through Nathan's chest. Daniel moved forward, his doctor's instincts taking over. "Deep breaths, Lucy. You're in River's Edge, with your dad and me. Buddy's here too." Lucy's breathing slowly steadied as reality filtered back. Buddy jumped onto her bed, usually forbidden, and pressed against her side. She buried her face in his fur. "Same dream?" Nathan asked softly. Lucy nodded. "The accident. When she. Your mother's accident." Daniel looked between them. "You never mentioned." 2 years ago, Nathan said quietly. Black ice. Lucy was in the car. Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. That's why you buried yourself in work even more. Why, Lucy? Why I'm such a mess? Lucy's bitter laugh held tears. Dad's solution was boarding school. Until I got kicked out. Lucy, that's not fair. She met Nathan's eyes. Like you avoiding Uncle Daniel was fair. Like abandoning Grandma was fair. The truth of her words echoed in the pre-dawn silence. Outside, early birds began their chorus, unaware of the human drama unfolding behind lit windows. You're right, Nathan said finally. I've been running. From everything. Everyone. Daniel leaned against the doorframe. Must be genetic. Dad used to say the Reed men had two speeds, running toward things or running away from them. Until Mom made him stop running. Nathan smiled faintly. Remember how she'd just plant herself in his path. Unstoppable force meets immovable object. She did that with Buddy too. Daniel gestured to the dog, still pressed against Lucy. First week she had him, he kept trying to escape. She just waited him out. Said sometimes love means being patient enough for someone to realize they want to stay. Lucy stroked Buddy's head, her movements calmer now. Is that why she made you guys share him? She's still trying to make you stop running? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Nathan's phone buzzed again in his pocket, Chicago calling, always calling. But in this moment, watching his daughter find comfort in the dog his mother had chosen, seeing his brother's familiar stance in the doorway, the call felt less urgent. I have to go to Chicago next week, Nathan said. Merger signing. But maybe you'd like to come with me, Lucy. We could clean out the apartment, bring more of our things here. Lucy's head snapped up. You mean? I mean maybe it's time to stop running. Daniel pushed off the doorframe. The clinic needs a corporate lawyer. Insurance companies are getting worse. It's not Chicago money, but... Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance. Like Mom did. Morning light began painting the room in soft hues, highlighting the family photos Lucy had rescued from the fallen boxes. 3 generations of Reeds looked back at them, watching, waiting, hoping. I have conditions, Lucy announced, sitting straighter. No more boarding schools. And Buddy sleeps in my room. The dog's tail thumped against her bed in obvious approval. He snores, Daniel warned, a smile tugging at his lips. Like father, like dog, Lucy shot back, and for the first time in years, both brothers laughed together. Nathan's phone buzzed one final time before falling silent. Outside, River's Edge was waking up, shops opening, cars starting, life moving forward in its steady, small-town rhythm. Inside, in a room filled with morning light and cautious hope, 3 generations of running finally began to slow. The Chicago skyline rose before them like a wall of glass and steel, so different from River's Edge's modest buildings that Lucy pressed her face against the car window, drinking in the familiar sight. Nathan felt it too, the city's magnetic pull, its promise of power and purpose. Yet somehow, it felt less like coming home than it had a week ago. Buddy's probably destroying Daniel's garden right now, Lucy said, breaking their contemplative silence. He did seem pretty attached to those tomato plants. Nathan navigated through familiar streets toward his high-rise apartment building. Think he'll forgive us for leaving him behind? Uncle Daniel said Mom never left him. Not even for a day. The words settled heavily between them as Nathan pulled into his reserved parking space. The building's doorman, Antonio, brightened at their approach. Mr. Reed. And Miss Lucy. We've missed you both. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than usual. Nathan's apartment, once a point of pride, now struck him as sterile. Chrome. Glass. Leather. No dog hair in sight. It's weird being back, Lucy said, running her finger along a dusty windowsill. Everything looks smaller. Yeah. Nathan checked his watch. The merger meeting's in 2 hours. Will you be okay here? Lucy's face closed off. Sure. Just like before, right? Before Nathan could respond, his phone rang. Richard Walsh, his biggest client. I have to take this. Lucy vanished into her room without another word. The merger meeting stretched into dinner, then into late-night negotiations. By the time Nathan returned home, the apartment was dark except for a light under Lucy's door. A note sat on the kitchen counter, ordered pizza. There's some left if corporate America didn't feed you. He knocked on her door. Lucy. What? Can I come in? A pause. Whatever. Her room was the only space in the apartment that had ever felt lived in. Now, most of it was in boxes. She lay on her stripped bed, scrolling through her phone. You packed, Nathan observed. That's why we came, isn't it? Lucy. Don't. She sat up. Don't pretend this is hard for you. This is your life, meetings and mergers and missing dinner. At least in River's Edge, there's Uncle Daniel. And Buddy. You really like it there? I like who you are there. Lucy's voice softened. You laugh more. You actually talk to people. To me. Nathan's phone buzzed again. Lucy's expression hardened. Go ahead. Answer it. Instead, Nathan turned off his phone. Tell me about school, he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. The real reason you got kicked out. Lucy stared at him for a long moment. You really want to know? I really want to know. She pulled her knees to her chest. I got into a fight. This girl, Amanda, she said Mom died because I distracted her. That if I hadn't been arguing with her about the music, she would have seen the ice. Lucy. Nathan reached for her, and for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. The accident wasn't your fault. That's what the therapist said. The one at school. But then you sent me away, and I thought, maybe you blamed me too. God, no. Never. Nathan held his daughter as she cried, remembering how small she'd looked in the hospital bed after the accident. I sent you away because I was scared. Of failing you. Of not being enough. Running away is what I do best. Like with Uncle Daniel. With Grandma. Exactly like that. Nathan smiled sadly. But your grandmother was smarter than all of us. She knew exactly what she was doing with that will. Lucy wiped her eyes. She wrote about you, you know. In her journal. About how proud she was, even when she was angry. How she knew you'd find your way back eventually. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago sparkled like a galaxy of earthbound stars. But Nathan found himself thinking of River's Edge's quiet streets, of Daniel's overgrown garden, of Buddy's steady presence. What if we didn't go back? Lucy asked suddenly. To River's Edge? No, I mean, what if we didn't come back here? To Chicago. To this life. Nathan looked around the pristine apartment, at the life he'd built of glass and chrome and missed dinners. The clinic does need a lawyer. Lucy's eyes lit up. Really? You'd consider it? I'm done running. Nathan squeezed her shoulder. Besides, someone needs to protect Buddy from Daniel's gardening ambitions. Lucy laughed, a real laugh, one he hadn't heard since before the accident. He's probably already dug up those tomato plants. Probably. Nathan stood. What do you say we order another pizza? I'll tell you about the time Daniel tried to teach Buddy to fetch and ended up in the lake instead. As they sat on Lucy's floor, eating cold pizza and sharing stories, Chicago continued its endless dance of lights outside. But for the first time, its siren song was drowned out by the quieter music of family, of home, of second chances blooming like Daniel's stubborn tomatoes in the garden of their mother's dreams. Buddy's enthusiastic welcome home nearly knocked Lucy off her feet. Daniel watched from the porch, trying to hide his relief at their return. "The garden survived," he said dryly. "Mostly." But something in his stance made Nathan pause. "What happened?" "Someone came by." "About Dad?" The kitchen felt smaller as they gathered around their mother's old table. Daniel placed a thick manila envelope between them. "Remember Dad's old research partner, Dr. Wilson? He's retiring, clearing out his office. Found these." Daniel spread out papers and photographs. Dad's original research on early-onset dementia. The work he abandoned when he trailed off. Lucy picked up a photo, their father in his lab coat, younger than she'd ever seen him. "What happened to his research?" "He shut everything down when the tumor was diagnosed," Nathan said. "Said he needed to focus on family." "No." Daniel's voice was sharp. "That's what we thought. What Mom let us think." He pulled out a letter, their mother's handwriting instantly recognizable. "She wrote this the day she got Buddy. It was with her things, but I only found it yesterday." Nathan read aloud, "My dear boys, there are truths I should have shared years ago. Your father didn't abandon his research by choice. The hospital board forced him out, afraid his diagnosis would impact their funding. He wanted to fight them, but fighting meant choosing between a lawsuit and your education. He chose you both, without hesitation. I watched him bury that dream, just as I've watched you both bury your bond as brothers. Some burials are necessary, but some things deserve to be unearthed." Buddy whined softly, sensing the tension. Lucy scratched his ears, her eyes on the scattered papers of her grandfather's lost legacy. "That's why you hated me focusing on corporate law," Nathan realized. "You knew about this?" "I found out right before he died. He made me promise not to tell you, didn't want to burden your career with his regrets." Daniel's laugh was bitter. "Then you took that job defending pharmaceutical companies, and I just couldn't stand to watch me become everything he fought against." Lucy's voice cut through their tension, "But you're not defending them anymore, right? You're helping Uncle Daniel with the clinic." The brothers' eyes met across their father's scattered research. In the growing darkness outside, crickets began their evening chorus, a familiar river's edge lullaby. "Dad's research," Nathan said slowly. "It wasn't finished. Not even close." Daniel pulled out more papers. He was onto something big, a potential early detection method that could have changed everything. But without funding. "The clinic has space," Lucy suggested. "In the basement? Where Uncle Daniel stores those old files." Buddy padded to the back door, his evening walk time approaching. Nathan stood to get the leash, but his hand lingered on the research papers. "A corporate lawyer who knows the pharmaceutical industry inside out," he mused. "And a doctor with access to current research." "Mom knew," Daniel said quietly. "She knew we'd need each other for this. For Dad's legacy. For our own." As they walked Buddy under the stars that night, 3 generations of Reeds connected by an old dog's leash, Nathan felt the weight of buried truths shifting into possibility. Their father's research spread across the kitchen table behind them, waiting to be unearthed, like seeds in Daniel's garden, like hope in their mother's final plans. Lucy's voice drifted back, "Grandma's last trick wasn't Buddy at all, was it?" Nathan watched his brother's silhouette ahead, remembered him practicing medical terms as kids, dreaming of following their father's path. "No," he said softly. "Her last trick was making us see what we could be if we stopped burying the past." Buddy barked at a passing owl, making Lucy laugh. The sound echoed off old brick buildings, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow, of redemption, of dreams long buried finally breaking through to light. The clinic's basement transformed over the following weeks. What began as a storage space for old medical records became a makeshift research lab, with their father's papers covering every available surface. Nathan and Daniel worked late into the nights, piecing together the puzzle their father had left behind. "Look at this," Daniel said one evening, holding up a yellowed page. Dad's early trials showed a 78% accuracy rate in predicting onset symptoms. "That's unprecedented for that time period." Nathan studied the legal documents spread before him. The hospital board knew. That's why they pushed him out. They were developing their own treatment program. Didn't want competition. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, organizing files while Buddy dozed at her feet. "But they can't do that now, right? Not with you two working together." The brothers exchanged glances. "It's complicated," Nathan admitted. "The intellectual property rights." A sudden crash upstairs made them all jump. Buddy's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Probably just Rose closing up," Daniel said, referring to the clinic's night nurse. But Buddy was already heading for the stairs, hackles raised. They found the clinic's front office ransacked, papers scattered everywhere. Through the window, they caught a glimpse of a figure disappearing into the darkness. "The research," Daniel breathed, racing back downstairs. But their father's papers remained untouched. They were looking for something else, Nathan realized, examining the mess. Patient files. The Robertson family records. Daniel's face paled. They're suing Valley Memorial, the hospital that pushed Dad out. Their son showed early dementia symptoms that the hospital missed. The same symptoms Dad's research might have caught, Nathan finished. Lucy hugged Buddy, who remained alert, guarding the basement door. "Someone doesn't want you finishing Grandpa's work." The next morning brought Howard Chen to the clinic, his usual gentle manner replaced by urgent concern. "Elizabeth warned me this might happen," he said, placing a new envelope on the desk. "She left this with instructions to give it to you if anyone came asking about William's research." Inside was a key and an old photograph of their parents standing before a cabin in the woods. On the back, their mother had written, "Where dreams go to hibernate, not die." Dad's hunting cabin, Daniel remembered. He used to disappear there for days when he was working on tough cases. Mom never sold it, Nathan added. Even when money was tight during his treatment. That evening, they followed the overgrown trail to the cabin, Buddy leading the way as if he'd made this journey before. Inside, beneath years of dust, they found a hidden compartment under the floorboards. "His backup files," Daniel whispered, lifting out boxes of research notes. Everything they thought they'd buried with him. Nathan picked up a journal, their father's familiar handwriting filling its pages. "Listen to this, they can take my lab, my funding, my career. But they cannot take the truth of what we've discovered. Someday, my sons will understand why some fights are worth losing everything for." Lucy's voice shook. "He knew you'd find it. Both of you. Together." Buddy nosed through the papers until he found something, an old photograph of the entire family at the lake, taken just before their father's diagnosis. On the back, their mother had written a single word, "Remember." That night, as they secured the research in the clinic's new basement safe, Nathan caught Daniel staring at their father's journal. "What are you thinking?" That mom knew exactly what she was doing with that will. She knew finding Buddy would lead to this. To us finishing Dad's work. To us remembering who we were meant to be. Lucy appeared in the doorway, Buddy at her side. "The Robertson case goes to court next month. Their lawyer called, they've heard rumors about Grandpa's research." Nathan straightened his father's papers with careful hands. "Then it's time to stop hiding. Dad lost everything to protect this research, to protect us. Now we protect his legacy." "Our legacy," Daniel corrected softly. Outside, an autumn wind stirred the trees, carrying with it the scent of approaching winter. But in the basement of a small-town clinic, surrounded by their father's dreams and their mother's faith, the Reed family planted new seeds of hope, watched over by a chocolate lab who had, perhaps, been guarding more than just their hearts all along. The Robertson hearing was 3 days away when the first threat arrived. A pristine envelope, hand-delivered to the clinic's front desk, contained a single photograph, Nathan and Daniel as children, playing in their father's office, with a red X drawn through their faces. On the back, typed words read, "History repeats itself. Walk away." Nathan studied the envelope under the clinic's harsh fluorescent lights. No postmark, no fingerprints. Professional. Like the break-in, Daniel added, pacing the office while Buddy watched from his corner bed. Valley Memorial's getting desperate. Lucy, who had been quietly doing homework nearby, closed her textbook. They're scared of you. Both of you. With good reason. Nathan pulled out their father's research files. The Robertson case is just the beginning. Once Dad's early detection protocol becomes public record in court, if we make it to court. Daniel's voice was tight. Valley Memorial has friends in high places. A crack of thunder made them all jump. Through the window, they watched storm clouds gathering over River's Edge, much like the ones from that night in the gazebo weeks ago. We should move everything to the cabin, Lucy suggested. It's safer there. But before anyone could respond, Buddy suddenly stood, hackles raised, staring at the back door. Moments later, they heard footsteps on the gravel path. Nathan moved Lucy behind him while Daniel reached for the phone, but the door opened to reveal Howard Chen, soaked from the approaching storm. "Thank God you're all still here," he panted. "Valley Memorial's board just called an emergency meeting. They're trying to file an injunction to stop you from testifying." "On what grounds?" Nathan demanded. "They're claiming Williams' research belongs to them. That he developed it using hospital resources." "That's a lie," Daniel snapped. "Dad worked on this at home, at the cabin, which we can prove," Nathan interrupted, legal instincts kicking in. "Mom kept everything, receipts, time logs, even Dad's old day planners. She knew we'd need them someday." Lucy's voice cut through their discussion. "Uncle Daniel, what's wrong with Buddy?" The dog stood frozen, still staring at the back door, a low growl building in his throat. Then they heard it, more footsteps, multiple sets, approaching from different directions. "The research," Nathan breathed. "Where is it?" "Safe room," Daniel said. "Mom had it installed after Dad got sick. All his backup files are there." They moved quickly, efficiently, like they'd rehearsed for this moment. Perhaps, in a way, they had been preparing since finding that first envelope in their mother's study. As they secured the last box, they heard glass breaking somewhere in the clinic. Buddy positioned himself between Lucy and the door, his protective instinct unmistakable. Like mother, like dog, Howard observed with a grim smile. Elizabeth always said he had a sixth sense about trouble. Through the safe room's small window, they watched shadowy figures moving through the clinic. Professional burglars, not common thieves, methodically searching each room. "They won't find anything," Daniel whispered. "Not this time." Lucy clutched their father's journal to her chest. "What do they expect to find?" "The research will come out in court anyway." "Unless that's not what they're really after," Nathan said slowly. "Howard, when does the statute of limitations expire on medical board fraud?" 20 years. Howard's eyes widened. "Which would be, next month." Nathan pulled out his phone, quickly typing. Dad wasn't just pushed out. Someone on that board buried evidence that could have helped hundreds of patients. Like the Robertsons, Daniel realized. And they're still on the board today. Nathan showed them a news article. Dr. James Porter, newly appointed Chief of Medicine at Valley Memorial. 20 years ago, he was the resident who falsified Dad's competency review. Thunder crashed closer now, and rain began pelting the window. Through the storm's fury, they heard the intruders growing frustrated, their searches becoming more aggressive. "The cabin," Lucy whispered. Grandma must have known about this too. That's why she kept it, why she left us the key in case of trouble. Buddy's ears perked up at a new sound, police sirens in the distance. The shadowy figures quickly retreated, leaving only scattered papers and muddy footprints as evidence of their presence. Later that night, as they secured the last of the research at the cabin, Nathan found Daniel staring at their father's old desk. "Remember when we thought this place was haunted?" Daniel smiled faintly. "All those nights Dad spent here, we were convinced he was hunting ghosts. Instead, he was hunting truth." Nathan picked up a framed photo of their father with his medical team. "Think he knew it would come to this?" "Mom did." Daniel gestured around the cabin. "Everything she did, keeping this place, getting Buddy, the will, she was preparing us for this fight." Lucy appeared with hot chocolate, their mother's recipe, and Buddy close behind. "The storm's getting worse." But as they gathered around the cabin's old fireplace, research safely hidden below, the howling wind felt less like a threat and more like a rallying cry. Their father's voice seemed to echo in the thunder, "Some fights are worth losing everything for." "We're not losing this one," Nathan said firmly. "Not with Mom's planning, Dad's research, and us finally on the same side." Buddy settled between them, alert but calm, as if he too knew this storm would pass, and that what remained after would be worth all the darkness they had to weather first. The county courthouse loomed before them, its stone facade gray against the morning sky. News vans lined the street. The Robertson case had drawn national attention, a David and Goliath story of a small-town clinic challenging a healthcare giant. "Ready?" Nathan straightened Daniel's tie, a gesture that transported them both back to high school debates and Father's Day ceremonies. "No," Daniel admitted. But Dad wasn't ready either, was he? Lucy waited with Buddy in Howard's office across the street, but Nathan could see them watching from the window. The dog's tail wagged as he caught their eye, offering encouragement in his own way. Inside the courtroom, Valley Memorial's legal team filled half the space with expensive suits and confident smiles. Dr. Porter sat among them, looking older than his photo but just as arrogant. He smirked as Nathan and Daniel entered. The Robertson family occupied the first row behind the plaintiff's table, John and Mary Robertson, and their son Billy, now 20, showing early signs of the same disease that had gone undiagnosed in his grandfather. The same disease their father might have caught, if his research hadn't been buried. "All rise," the bailiff called, and the battle began. Valley Memorial's strategy became clear quickly: discredit William Reed's research as the desperate work of a dying man, too personally invested to be objective. Their star witness, Dr. Porter, took the stand with practiced ease. Dr. Reed's condition affected his judgment, Porter testified smoothly. "The board had no choice but to protect our patients." Nathan stood for cross-examination, holding their father's journal. "Dr. Porter, are you familiar with this?" "Objection, Your Honor," Valley Memorial's lawyer interrupted. "That document wasn't part of discovery." Actually, Nathan smiled, it was. Exhibit 47C, William Reed's personal research logs, submitted last week. Dr. Porter, would you read the entry from September 15, 2004? Porter's confidence wavered as he read. "Porter came to me today. Says the board wants to bury the early detection protocol. Too much liability in admitting we could have caught cases sooner. He offered me a deal, resign quietly, they'll fund both boys' education. Sarah thinks we should fight, but..." And the next day's entry? Porter's voice shook, "Called Nathan at school. He's so close to graduating, to achieving everything I dreamed for him. Daniel's just started pre-med. Their futures or my legacy? No choice at all." The courtroom fell silent. In that moment, Nathan felt the weight of his father's sacrifice anew, not just his career, but his silence, protecting his sons from a truth that might have destroyed their dreams. During the lunch recess, Daniel found Nathan in their mother's garden behind Howard's office. Lucy had walked Buddy there, the dog's presence a steady comfort. Dad knew, Daniel said quietly. He knew Porter was falsifying results even before his diagnosis. And he chose us. Nathan watched Lucy throwing Buddy's ball, the dog's joy untouched by human complications. He chose our future over his legacy. But Mom chose to give us both. Lucy joined them, leaves in her hair from playing with Buddy. That's why she kept everything, right? So you could have both, your careers and his legacy. The afternoon session brought Mary Robertson to the stand. She spoke of her father-in-law's decline, of watching the same symptoms emerge in her son. Her testimony was powerful, but the turning point came from an unexpected source. During a brief recess, Buddy, who had been quietly lying under Howard's desk across the street, suddenly began barking frantically. Lucy followed him to a dusty corner where he pawed at a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a manila envelope, more of their mother's careful planning. Dad's original patient files, Daniel breathed, reviewing them quickly. Cases Porter buried, families never notified of their risk factors. Mom must have made copies before. The evidence was admissible, barely, and damning. Porter's carefully constructed testimony crumbled under its weight. By day's end, Valley Memorial's lawyers were approaching with settlement offers. But Nathan, standing with his brother before the judge, thought of their father's words, "Some fights are worth losing everything for." "No deals," he said firmly. "The research goes public. All of it." The judge's ruling came just before sunset, a complete victory. The Robertson family would receive compensation, but more importantly, William Reed's early detection protocol would finally see the light of day. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but the Reed family slipped away to their mother's garden. Buddy greeted them with boundless enthusiasm, muddying their court clothes and making Lucy laugh. "Think Dad would be proud?" Daniel asked, watching the sun set behind the old church steeple. "Of us finally working together instead of against each other?" Nathan smiled. "Mom would be." Lucy sat between them, Buddy's head in her lap. "She planned it all, didn't she? Right down to getting a dog who'd dig up old secrets." Speaking of secrets. Daniel pulled out their father's journal. "There's more here. About a potential treatment protocol he was developing. It's incomplete, but with current technology." Nathan looked at his brother, really looked at him, and saw not the angry young man he'd left behind, but the dedicated doctor their father had always known he would become. "The clinic could use a research department," he said carefully. "And I hear the corporate lawyer position comes with lab funding." As darkness fell over River's Edge, for hearts beat in quiet synchronization, 3 human, 1 canine, each understanding that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting the past, but from finally letting it show you the way forward. The first snow of winter dusted River's Edge like powdered sugar, transforming their mother's garden into a wonderland of white. Buddy's paw prints marked fresh trails between the dormant rosebushes, where Daniel had carefully wrapped their mother's prized blooms against the coming cold. The research center called again, Nathan said, bringing coffee to the back porch where Daniel sat reviewing patient files. "They want to fast-track Dad's protocol for clinical trials. Johns Hopkins too." Daniel accepted the coffee, their fingers briefly touching, casual contact that would have been unthinkable months ago. "They're particularly interested in the genetic markers he identified." Inside, they could hear Lucy video chatting with her new friends from River's Edge High School, her laughter mixing with the sound of Buddy's tail thumping against the floor. The dog had appointed himself her personal study buddy, lying beside her through hours of homework and college application essays. "She's applying to pre-med programs," Daniel said quietly. "Did you know?" Nathan nodded, watching his breath fog in the cold air. "She wants to specialize in neurological research. Continue the family legacy. Dad would have loved that. Mom knew she would." Nathan pulled out their mother's journal, he'd taken to carrying it like a talisman. "Listen to this entry from last year, watched Lucy's science fair presentation online today. She has William's curiosity, his drive to understand. When the time comes, she'll find her way back to his path, just like my boys will find their way back to each other. Daniel's laugh was soft, touched with wonder. She orchestrated everything. The will, Buddy, even keeping Dad's research hidden until we were ready to face it together. Not everything, Lucy said, stepping onto the porch with Buddy at her heels. She couldn't have known I'd get kicked out of boarding school, or that Dad's old research would be exactly what the Robertsons needed. No, Nathan agreed, making room for her between them. But she knew we'd need each other when the right moment came. Buddy shook off some snow and settled at their feet, ever the guardian. In the distance, church bells rang, calling the town to evening service. The clinic board approved the new research wing, Daniel announced. Construction starts in spring. The William and Elizabeth Reed Center for Neurological Research, Lucy recited proudly. Has a nice ring to it. Nathan watched a cardinal land on their mother's bird feeder. She'd insisted on keeping it filled even in her final days. Remember how Dad used to say every scientific breakthrough starts with a simple question? What if? Daniel smiled. His favorite words. What if we made it a teaching hospital? Lucy suggested suddenly. Small scale, focusing on early detection and prevention. Combining Grandpa's research with modern techniques. The brothers exchanged looks over her head. You've given this some thought, Nathan observed. Well, yeah. Lucy blushed. I mean, if I'm going to medical school, I'll need somewhere to do my residency, right? The simple confidence in her voice, the assumption that they'd all still be here, working together, years from now, struck Nathan deeply. He remembered his own hasty departure from River's Edge, how easily he'd convinced himself that success meant leaving everything behind. Did I tell you what Billy Robertson said after the trial? Daniel asked. He said knowing about his condition early, having time to prepare and research options, it gave him something his grandfather never had. Hope. That's what Dad was really researching, Nathan realized. Not just detection methods, but hope itself. Buddy suddenly perked up, trotting to the garden's edge where the first snowdrops were pushing through the snow, their mother's favorite flowers, blooming months early. Mom's garden always did have a mind of its own, Daniel mused. Lucy took pictures of the tiny white blooms. Like her last gift keeps on giving. Speaking of gifts. Nathan pulled out an envelope. Howard brought this by. Apparently, Mom left instructions for it to be delivered 6 months after the will was read. Inside was a single photograph, their father in his study, surrounded by research papers, with a young Nathan and Daniel sleeping on the couch behind him. On the back, their mother had written, "Some legacies are written in papers and protocols. Others in the quiet moments between discoveries. Both matter. Both heal." As the snow fell softly around them, Nathan thought of all the healing that had happened in this garden, between brothers, between father and daughter, between past and present. Buddy returned to them, shaking snow from his coat, ever present, ever watchful, the instrument of their mother's final and greatest experiment in family chemistry. You know, Lucy said thoughtfully, we never did figure out how Buddy always knew where to find things. The research in the cabin, the evidence at Howard's. Maybe Mom trained him, Daniel suggested. Or maybe, Nathan smiled, watching the dog's wise brown eyes, some things aren't meant to be figured out. Just appreciated. The garden lay quiet under its blanket of snow, dormant but not dead, waiting for spring's renewal. Inside the house, Lucy's college applications sat ready to be sent, their father's research waited to help new families, and their mother's roses slept beneath their winter wrapping, dreaming of blooms to come. Some legacies, Nathan realized, weren't meant to end. They simply changed form, like snow melting into soil, feeding the next season's growth. Their mother had known this all along, had planned for it, hoped for it, believed in it enough to stake everything on a will, a dog, and the healing power of time. Spring came to River's Edge like a watercolor painting, washing the world in gentle greens and pinks. Their mother's garden burst into life, roses climbing trellises Daniel had rebuilt during the winter. The morning of the Will's one-year anniversary dawned clear and bright, finding Nathan at the kitchen window, watching Buddy chase butterflies through the awakening garden. "Can't sleep either." Lucy padded in, her acceptance letter from Johns Hopkins clutched in one hand. She'd taken to carrying it everywhere, like a talisman. "Just thinking about what Mom would say." Nathan poured her a cup of coffee, a new tradition between them. "1 year ago, I was ready to sell this place and run back to Chicago. And now you're designing a research center with Uncle Daniel." Lucy bumped his shoulder affectionately. "Funny how things work out." Buddy's excited barking drew their attention. Daniel was crossing the garden, carrying something large and wrapped in canvas. "Found it in Dad's cabin," he explained, carefully unwrapping a portrait they'd never seen before. Their parents sat in this very garden, young and smiling, with 2 small boys and a chocolate lab at their feet. "That's Roger," Nathan remembered suddenly. "Dad's old dog. I'd forgotten." Mom hadn't. Daniel turned the portrait over, revealing a note taped to the back, "For my boys, when they remember. Some circles are meant to be unbroken." Lucy studied the painting. "You look happy. All of you." "We were." Nathan touched the painted image of their father gently. "Before ambition and anger and silence got in the way. Before we forgot what mattered," Daniel added softly. Buddy nosed the painting curiously, then looked up at them with an expression so similar to the painted dogs that Lucy laughed. "Maybe that's why Grandma chose him. He reminded her of better times." "Not better," Nathan corrected. "Just different. What we have now, it's something new. Something stronger." The day brought a steady stream of visitors. Howard came with the final paperwork for the house transfer, though they all knew it was a formality now. The Robertsons stopped by, bringing news that Billy's latest tests showed promising results using their father's protocol. Even Dr. Porter's resignation from Valley Memorial made the morning news, a quiet epilogue to their victory. As evening approached, they gathered in the garden for a small ceremony, their own private memorial. Lucy had suggested it, understanding somehow that they needed this moment of closure, of celebration. "I found this in Mom's things," Daniel said, unveiling a small garden stone. The inscription read, "In this garden, love grows wild and forgiveness blooms eternal." They placed it beneath the largest rose bush, where Buddy had first dug up their mother's letter 1 year ago. The dog watched the proceedings with dignified attention, as if understanding the significance of the moment. "Should we say something?" Lucy asked. Nathan looked at his daughter, seeing in her face echoes of his mother's wisdom, his father's determination. "Mom would probably tell us we talk too much already. That actions matter more than words." "Like getting a dog?" Daniel smiled. "Like keeping a garden alive," Nathan added. "Like building a research center," Lucy finished. Buddy chose that moment to flop down on the freshly turned earth beside the garden stone, making them all laugh. Some things, it seemed, remained constant: a dog's simple joy, a garden's renewal, a family's love. Later, as stars began to peek through the twilight, they sat on the porch steps, sharing stories and plans. Lucy talked about her upcoming freshman year, her dreams of combining their father's research with new technologies. Daniel discussed expansions for the clinic, ways to reach more families like the Robertsons. Nathan listened, feeling the weight of his corporate suits and corner offices falling away, replaced by something lighter, truer. "You know what's weird?" Lucy mused, scratching Buddy's ears. "A year ago, this all seemed like a punishment. Living here, dealing with family stuff, taking care of a dog. And now?" Nathan prompted. "Now it feels like coming home. Like we were all just lost for a while, and Grandma." She paused, looking at Buddy thoughtfully. Grandma gave us a map back to each other. Daniel reached out, touched the garden stone gently. She always did play the long game. Remember how she'd let us figure things out ourselves, even when she knew we were going about it wrong? Because the lesson meant more that way, Nathan nodded. The hard path was the healing path. Buddy stirred, alerting them to movement at the garden gate. But it was just the evening breeze stirring their mother's wind chimes, a melody she'd loved floating across the garden she'd tended so faithfully. The will's conditions are met, Daniel said quietly. The house is officially ours. Was there ever really any doubt? Lucy asked. Nathan watched Buddy dozing between them, the dog who had become so much more than a condition in a will. I think Mom knew the answer to that question long before we did. Above them, the first star of evening appeared, bright and steady. In the garden, their mother's roses turned their faces to the fading light, their fragrance mixing with memories of laughter, tears, and healing. The circle their mother had drawn around them, with a will, a dog, and unwavering faith, was complete, but its meaning had transformed. No longer a boundary keeping them together, but a foundation helping them grow. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the William and Elizabeth Reed Center for Neurological Research fell on a perfect autumn morning, exactly 1 year and 3 months after their mother's will had first brought them back together. The old clinic had been transformed, its brick facade restored to its original glory, while a modern glass and steel wing stretched into what had once been an empty lot. Nathan adjusted Lucy's graduation cap. She'd insisted on wearing it for the ceremony, even though her first semester at Johns Hopkins wouldn't start for another month. Mom would have loved this. She does love it, Lucy corrected softly. She's here. In every brick, every rose bush, every piece of Dad's research that finally gets to help people. Buddy sat perfectly positioned between them, wearing a bow tie that Daniel had jokingly attached to his collar. The dog had aged some over the past year, gray starting to dust his muzzle, but his eyes remained bright and alert as ever. The crowd gathering for the ceremony represented every chapter of their journey. The Robertsons stood near the front, Billy looking stronger and more confident than ever. Howard Chin dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, their mother's last letter tucked safely in his breast pocket. Even some of Nathan's old colleagues from Chicago had come, marveling at the change in the man they'd once known only as a ruthless corporate lawyer. Daniel stepped up to the podium, his doctor's coat exchanged for a suit that matched Nathan's. A year ago, he began, our mother gave us what seemed like an ultimatum: take care of a dog together, or lose our childhood home. He paused, smiling as Buddy's tail thumped against the ground. What we didn't realize was that she wasn't giving us a challenge, she was giving us a gift. The gift of remembering who we were meant to be. Nathan joined his brother at the podium. Our father believed that the greatest medical breakthroughs come not from technology or funding, but from asking the simple question, what if? What if we could detect diseases earlier? What if we could give families more time? What if we could turn pain into purpose? And our mother, Lucy added, stepping up beside them, Buddy following faithfully, believed in asking an even simpler question: what if love is the greatest healing power of all? The ribbon fell away under their combined hands, and applause rippled through the crowd. But Nathan's attention was caught by something else, a familiar scent on the breeze. Their mother's roses, planted along the center's walkway, had bloomed weeks early, their petals catching the autumn sunlight like fragments of memory made tangible. Later, after the speeches and congratulations, the three Reeds and their faithful companion walked through their mother's garden behind the old house. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, much like that first evening when they'd gathered here, broken and uncertain, a year ago. Found something else in the cabin yesterday, Daniel said, pulling out a weathered envelope. Mom's handwriting. The letter inside was dated just days before she passed. My dearest ones, if you're reading this, then my final experiment has succeeded. You've remembered who you are, not just as individuals, but as a family. Nathan, you've learned that true success isn't measured in billable hours but in moments of connection. Daniel, you've discovered that holding on to anger only keeps your hands too full to grasp joy. And Lucy, my precious granddaughter, you found your place in our family's legacy of healing. As for Buddy, well, every scientist needs a faithful assistant. He's been mine in making sure you all found your way back to each other. Dogs, like love, have a way of digging up what we try to bury and cherishing what we try to throw away. The center will be your future, but this garden will always be your heart. Plant new memories here. Let love grow wild. And remember, some experiments aren't about finding answers, but about asking the right questions. All my love, forever and always, Mom. Buddy pressed against their legs as they read, as if offering the comfort he'd provided so many times over the past year. His presence, once a condition of inheritance, had become the heartbeat of their reformed family. We should add something, Lucy suggested, pulling out a small garden stone she'd been hiding. Together, they placed it beside Elizabeth's original marker. The new inscription read, "In this garden, 3 generations of healing continue to grow." Nathan looked at his brother, his partner now in both the center and in life's journey, and at his daughter, no longer the angry teenager who'd arrived in River's Edge, but a young woman ready to carry their family's legacy forward. Between them sat Buddy, their unlikely guardian and guide, their mother's final and greatest gift. "You know what Dad would say about all this?" Daniel smiled. "What if?" Nathan and Lucy answered together. As darkness settled over River's Edge, the garden glowed with fireflies, nature's own celebration lights. Through the open windows of their home, they could see the center's new wing gleaming in the distance, a beacon of hope for families like the Robertsons. But here, in this garden where their mother's roses bloomed and their father's dreams had found new life, they had discovered an even greater truth. Sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't made in laboratories or courtrooms, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, where love grows wild and forgiveness blooms eternal, and a mother's wisdom echoes in the simple presence of a chocolate lab with gray-dusted muzzle and knowing eyes. The experiment was complete, but its effects would ripple outward forever, touching lives their parents had never known, healing hearts their father had never reached. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the research or the center or even the garden, but the simple truth their mother had known all along: family, like flowers, can bloom again after the harshest winter, as long as its roots remain strong and someone remembers to tend the garden with love.